Chapter 3, Part 2. All right, let's talk about how we measure how productive an ecosystem is. Right? So there's two terms. There's gross primary productivity, GPP, and net primary productivity, NPP. So I always like to think of this like whenever you get your first job and whenever you get your paycheck, basically what is, the money you make is your gross paycheck, right? It's everything, total. The net is what you take home because they take stuff out, taxes, that kind of stuff. So that is your net. That is what you actually get in your bank account. So gross is the total amount of solar energy that the producers in an ecosystem take in, right? That they capture and are able to use for photosynthesis. But then we also have the net, because what we have to do is we have to take into consideration that these producers also have to breathe. So they have respiration as well. So the net is the GPP minus the energy respired to get the NPP, okay? Yeah, you know GPP, you know me. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry I had to do that. Yeah, I apologize. Okay, so here's a couple of different pictures that show this. The one on the left is showing you that out of all the energy that the sun provides, okay, that plants and producers take in this energy. So the total of that is what? The GPP, okay? So the GPP is the total that the plants take in. The NPP is what is left of that total productivity after we subtract out what was lost to breathing and respiration. So I like this picture over here because it shows that net equals the gross minus the respiration. So you'll have some questions where you're going to have to do this, and it's really easy to get the net. All you do is subtract. Super easy. Let's talk a bit like the details of this primary productivity. So it's highest where temperatures are warm and where you have lots of solar energy. So think around the equator, right? And think about what kind of biomes you see around the equator. So those would be things like tropical rainforests, salty marshes, coral reefs. Those are going to be the most abundant when it comes to this net primary productivity. It's like I said, so it's typically warm. There's lots of solar energy. So think equator. This is kind of a cool picture I wanted to show you guys. So you can see in terms of land biomes, desert, tundra, grassland, shrubland, not a lot of net primary productivity, not in comparison to the forests have more because there's so many trees. Intensive agriculture, yes, because we pack so many plants together in such a small area. That's part of it, and we water the crap out of it. But look here. Look how extensive, look how high this value is in terms of for the tropical rainforest. And then estuaries, coral reefs is also almost equally as high. And then as we get into like the coastal zones, we don't have nearly as much algae, things that are undergoing photosynthesis. And then open ocean, not much. So if you're thinking about the amount of rain, that is a big factor for this. This shows you here along the equator how there's so much rain in these areas, and that would allow for a lot of warmth, okay? And that sun penetrates really well. And this is just another diagram to kind of help prove this, that this NPP is a thing. Okay, now let's shift it and talk about secondary production. So primary production is all about the producers. So secondary production is, now we're talking about consumers. So let's say we have this cute little caterpillar. So this cute little caterpillar, he's eating the plant, the producer. And if you take a look, out of all of that he ate, some of it goes for cellular respiration over here on the right. A little bit of it is for growth, but most of it, yeah, it goes straight on through and out the other side. So this is just kind of a follow-up into what we're going to be talking about into the levels of organization in the trophic cascade. So let's kind of get there. Let's talk about this energy transfer. So what we're going to talk about is a couple of key terms here. Biomass, which is all the energy that is measured in an ecosystem, all right, total energy. So it could be from photosynthesis, respiration, all that good stuff. And then standing crop is the term that we use whenever we're talking about just what's there at a particular time. So in the agricultural areas, standing crop is a very important thing to keep in mind. Why? Because if you're not going to grow a crop in the winter, your standing crop, that biomass is a lot less than it is during the growing season when it's warm. So this is the 10% rule. You guys learned this in biology, and we're going to talk about this again, and you will use this all year. So the 10% rule is basically how efficient we are at moving up the trophic cascade and those trophic levels, okay? So producers make a lot of energy, and those primary consumers, they only gain 10% of that energy. It's only 10% can be converted into energy up to that next level. So those primary consumers, so then if you have a secondary consumer, say a human or a lion, like in the picture, then they only get 10%. This is why a lot of people are saying you should go plant-based in your diet, is because there's not nearly as much energy loss as we move up through the different energy levels. All right, so now these ecosystems, right? We talked about the biomass, we talked about MPP and GPP. Now, let's talk about the disturbances. Every ecosystem gets disturbed, right? It could be caused by humans. It could be caused by natural things, natural disasters, rain, torrential rains, all that kind of stuff. It could be seasonal. So, but it could be anything that causes something to change in the population or the community composition. It could be migration, right, due to seasonal changes, all that kind of stuff. So here's a few that are listed as natural disturbances. And then the anthropogenic, right, those are the human ones. Basically, it's us taking out the ecosystems to benefit ourselves in different ways, whether it's construction or to convert things to farmland, or if we're utilizing an area to build roads, that kind of stuff. Here's an example of a natural disturbance. So here in the upper left corner is what this area looked like, this little estuary, what it looked like before Hurricane Katrina. And then after, you can see how it was just completely annihilated. All right, so all the damaging, the hurricane came through, winds, rain, all that stuff washed out a bunch of this area, and it is completely different after the fact. Now, this is also part of a watershed, so we're going to shift into that a little bit. So a watershed is, think of it like temporary holding ground for water, okay? And it's all the area and land where the water drains into. So remember, water is going to go downhill, and water always finds the mean of least resistance. So if it, like little riverlets, creeks, shallow ponds that may evaporate over time if there's dryness. So all of those are considered to be watersheds. A lot of water can just kind of sit there. It doesn't really tend to sink in too much. There may be like a lot of hard rock underneath, not a lot of that percolation down. And so it runs off. And so watersheds is where the water runs off into, and then it will continue moving into bigger bodies of water if that can. All right, now let's talk, we're going to shift gears again here a little bit, kind of back to the whole disturbance thing. So when something, an ecosystem is disturbed, it can exhibit resistance, or it can also exhibit resilience. Resistance is basically, think about it, how much is it kind of, how is it just affecting its overall energy flow, okay? So it could affect a lot, certain issues in certain parts of it, but not the entire ecosystem as a whole. Resilience is whether or not an ecosystem can bounce back to its original. So if you think back to the Hurricane Katrina slide, so was that resistant? No, it was not resistant. It experienced a lot of damage. Was it resilient? Now that I don't know the answer to that slide in particular in that example, but the resilience would come into play as to whether or not the organisms that lived there came back, right? So this picture here shows you that over time, let's say there was a disturbance, say hurricane right here. Now, if there wasn't a lot of change, then we would say it is highly resistant. But if there was another disturbance, a bigger hurricane, and it annihilated it even more, then that resistance may have gone down, okay? Resiliency, on the other hand, would show that if there is this hurricane, things, animals may have left for a period of time, some of them may have been killed, it may have disrupted the natural order of things for some time, but it was able to bounce back. And as it bounced back, then what happens is if there's another hurricane, then that second hurricane, it might show a little bit higher resiliency because it's already been through that scenario, right? It's like, it's kind of hardened. Yeah, it's a hardened criminal. It's already been there. It knows how to respond. I'm sorry. So this also kind of leads us to the whole concept of what we call restoration ecology. And can ecosystems, how resilient are they? Can they restore themselves, or do they need our help and assistance to possibly restore themselves? Oil spills, or that's a big area where this is prevalent. Oil spills or chemical spills in waterways especially, then humans sometimes will go in to help mitigate and restore that kind of stuff. Now, this is the last slide for this part of the presentation. So the intermediate disturbance hypothesis is an important one. So think about what the word intermediate means. Intermediate means kind of medium, right? In between. Disturbance, something's happened. So as we've seen, just not from anthropogenic influences, but just natural disasters as well, we can see that, there's like a happy medium. If there's an ecosystem where there's not a lot of bad stuff happening, typically there's not a lot of species, or it can also bounce back very well, okay? It can't. But if you have a moderate to high number of species, and it can tend to deal with some disturbance, but there is a limit. If there's a lot of disturbances, so a lot of pollution spills or construction in the area, possibly flooding due to a dam being built, a lot more of that, then the species is going to decrease. So this is the intermediate disturbance hypothesis.